The cafeteria was at full roar, clattering trays, overlapping chatter, the squeak of shoes on linoleum. But in one corner, the sound warped into a sharp, ugly silence. Three of the school's most notorious troublemakers, Evan, Brock, and Kyle, had just closed in around Mia, the new transfer. Mia was 17 petite, with long black hair that slipped like ink over her shoulders. She had been at the school less than 2 weeks, keeping her head down, avoiding the gaze of the predators who thrived in these hallways. Unfortunately, the quiet ones were always the juiciest targets. Evan, the ringleader, with a cruel smirk, leaned over her lunch table. "Welcome to Roosevelt High, Princess," he drawled, lifting a massive bone still slick with barbecue grease from his tray. Before Mia could react, he shoved it toward her lips, forcing her to bite down as his friends erupted in laughter. The smell of fat and char hit her nose. Her first instinct was to pull back, but Evan's palm clamped the back of her head, holding her there. The humiliation seared deeper than the grease. Conversations around them died. The cafeteria became an arena. Every eye watched, most with morbid curiosity, some with pity. Mia's pulse slowed, not quickened. Behind her dark lashes, her eyes went cold. Not the trembling fear the bullies expected, but something sharper, heavier. Her fingers twitched under the table, curling into a loose, precise shape. She could have ended it right there, but she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she leaned forward, took the bone between her teeth, and yanked it from Evan's hand with a single sharp motion. His smirk faltered for the first time. Without breaking eye contact, she placed the bone on her tray, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and returned to eating as though nothing had happened. Brock laughed too loudly, trying to fill the sudden strange quiet. "She's got bite, huh?" he said, shoving Kyle's shoulder. But there was an undercurrent of unease, something about the way Mia had looked at Evan, like she'd measured his weakness and stored it away. Evan tried to brush it off, swaggering toward the next table, but his hand lingered near his wrist as though it ached. The bone incident should have made her wilt. Instead, she seemed composed, and that composure felt dangerous. From across the room, one of the lunch monitors eyed the scene, but said nothing. Students whispered, speculating, where was she from? Why hadn't she fought back? Why did it feel like she was waiting for something? Mia chewed slowly, scanning the cafeteria as if memorizing the layout, the exits, the spacing between tables. She noted where the bullies sat, the rhythm of their movements, the way Evan favored his right leg slightly when he walked. She had learned a long time ago that revenge wasn't served hot or cold. It was served with precision. And when she struck, it would be in a way they would never forget. Her lips curved, just enough for only herself to notice. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows of the math wing, casting long shadows across the hallway. Mia walked with her usual quiet pace, her head slightly bowed, earbuds in, but no music playing. She wasn't listening to a song, she was listening to footsteps. Behind her, the three voices rose in laughter. Evan's low, mocking tone, Brock's harsh bark, Kyle's snorting chuckle. They were following her, keeping just enough distance to avoid suspicion, but close enough to make their presence felt. "Hey, Bone Girl," Brock called, his voice bouncing down the hall. "You want a side of gravy with that?" The sound of Kyle's wheezy laugh followed scraping like sandpaper. Mia stopped at her locker, pretending to fumble with the combination. The metal door rattled slightly under her touch, masking the subtle breath she took to steady her pulse. The bullies slowed, closing in. Evan leaned against the locker next to hers, blocking part of her view. "You got a smart mouth, huh? Just sitting there like you owned the place." His grin was back, but his eyes flickered. He was still thinking about that moment in the cafeteria. She met his gaze for the first time since lunch. Her eyes didn't blink, didn't flinch. They simply locked on his, and in that stillness, something shifted. He felt it, though he couldn't name it. A faint prickling at the back of his neck. "You should be careful," Mia said softly. Her tone wasn't threatening, but it wasn't submissive either. It was something in between, like a fact stated without emotion. Brock laughed. "Careful? What's she gonna do, gum us to death?" He reached out, intending to flick her forehead. It happened so fast that none of them could process it in real time. Mia's hand shot up her fingers, catching his wrist in midair. It wasn't a squeeze. It wasn't a twist. It was a precise, controlled hold. She shifted her weight slightly, and a sharp click echoed from Brock's shoulder. His laugh broke into a hiss of pain. She released him instantly, stepping back as if nothing had happened. "First warning," she said quietly, closing her locker with a slow, deliberate motion. Brock stared at her, rubbing his arm. "What the hell?" he began, but Evan cut him off with a glare. Kyle shuffled his feet. "Man, she's weird." Evan forced a smirk. "Don't let her get in your head. She's just playing mind games." But his tone lacked conviction, and all three of them knew it. Mia slung her backpack over one shoulder and walked away without another glance. Students who had witnessed the exchange whispered, some pulling out their phones, others simply staring at her retreating figure. As she disappeared around the corner, Brock muttered under his breath, "I don't know what she just did, but it hurt like hell." Evan's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way this girl operated. No fear, no fluster, just this quiet, unnerving control. It was like she was baiting them into something, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that thought, unwelcome as it was, made him more determined to push her until she snapped. What he didn't realize was that snapping wasn't in her nature. Calculated demolition was. The locker room was nearly empty after school. The clatter of cleats on tile echoed as the last of the soccer players left, leaving behind the smell of sweat and damp towels. Mia had stayed late to retrieve her forgotten water bottle, the one she always kept tucked in the corner of her locker. As she zipped her hoodie, the door swung open with a loud metallic groan. Evan, Brock, and Kyle stepped inside, their sneakers squeaking on the floor. The air seemed to tighten. "Well, well. Bone Girl's all alone," Evan said, letting the door close behind them with a deliberate clang. The sound of the latch locking was sharp, final. Mia didn't turn around immediately. She placed the bottle in her backpack, zipped it shut, and only then glanced over her shoulder. "I told you to be careful." Brock barked a laugh. "What's the plan, huh? Gonna give us another first warning?" He moved closer, cracking his knuckles for effect. Kyle circled to her right, blocking the row of lockers that led to the exit. "She thinks she's some action movie star," he sneered. Evan took a slow step forward. "You humiliated me at lunch, and you made Brock look like an idiot in the hallway. You think you can just walk around acting like you're untouchable?" Mia closed her eyes briefly, as if weighing something. When she opened them, the softness was gone, replaced by an icy clarity. "I don't think I'm untouchable," she said. "I know exactly how far you can be pushed before you regret everything." Brock lunged first, reaching for her shoulder, but she pivoted her foot, hooking behind his ankle. In one smooth motion, she shifted her weight and sent him crashing backward into an open locker door. The hollow bang echoed through the room. Kyle rushed in, but Mia moved before he even reached her. Her palm shot upward into his chin, not enough to break anything, but enough to snap his head back and send him stumbling. Evan froze for a fraction of a second, then charged. Mia stepped aside, catching his forearm and twisting not violently, but with surgical precision. The sudden torque forced him to his knees. She leaned in close, her voice low and calm. Second warning. She released him, and he cradled his arm, shock flashing across his face. He wasn't used to being overpowered, especially not by someone who looked like Mia. Brock groaned from the floor. Kyle rubbed his jaw and Evan stayed kneeling, his pride more bruised than his body. The room felt smaller, now the tension dense enough to choke on. "You have one more chance to walk away," Mia said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. She stepped past them, without haste pushing the door open. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Brock muttered, "She's crazy." Evan shot him a sharp look. "No," he said quietly. "She's dangerous." Outside, the sky was painted in fading streaks of orange and purple. Mia walked down the sidewalk. Her steps measured the cool evening air, brushing against her face. She knew they wouldn't stop, not yet. But that was fine. She was done warning them. The next time they came for her, there would be no restraints. Morning arrived with a thin veil of fog curling around the edges of the school's front lawn. The atmosphere inside the building was unusually charged. Whispers traveled fast, and word of the locker room incident had spread farther than Mia anticipated. Still, she kept her head down, weaving through the crowded hallway as though nothing had happened. The bullies were waiting for her. Evan, Brock, and Kyle stood at the far end of the main corridor, leaning against the lockers like predators at the edge of a watering hole. Evan's arm was in a loose sling, likely unnecessary, but it was a visual cue meant to draw attention. Students slowed their pace to watch. "She's here," Kyle muttered under his breath, and the three straightened. Mia's gaze flicked over them once before settling back on the path ahead. But as she drew closer, Evan stepped forward, blocking her way. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he said loudly, ensuring the surrounding crowd heard every word. "You're just a scared little girl who got lucky twice." The other students leaned in, phones subtly raised. Brock smirked, reaching into his backpack and pulling out something wrapped in a napkin. With a flourish, he revealed another large bone dripping with sauce. "Thought you might be hungry," he jeered. The laughter that followed was scattered but sharp. Mia stopped. For a heartbeat, she simply looked at the bone, then at Brock, then at the crowd. And in that silence, the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop. "You really don't listen," she said, her voice even. Before Brock could respond, her hand shot out, not toward the bone, but toward his wrist. She twisted, and the bone clattered to the floor. Her other hand gripped the back of his neck, guiding his momentum downward until his knees hit the tile with a painful crack. Kyle lunged forward, but Mia pivoted her foot, sweeping out in a perfect arc. The sole of her sneaker connected with his sternum, sending him sprawling backward into a locker with a metallic crash. Evan roared in frustration and rushed her, swinging with his good arm. Mia caught his strike midair, stepping into his space with a speed that left him off balance. In one fluid movement, she spun him, pressed his arm behind his back, and planted him face first against the locker door. The crowd gasped, the sound swelling like a wave. Phones clicked and recorded from every angle. Mia leaned close to Evan's ear, her words too soft for anyone else to hear. "This is the last time I touch you. Next time, it'll be worse." She released him, and he stumbled forward, catching himself against the lockers. Brock stayed kneeling, clutching his wrist, while Kyle wheezed on the floor. Mia didn't wait for a reaction. She stepped over, the fallen bone, her sneakers silent against the tile. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path for her as she walked away without looking back. By the time she rounded the corner, the hallway erupted into a storm of chatter, disbelief, and shaky admiration. The bullies stayed behind, frozen, not just by the pain, but by the realization that they were no longer in control. The rest of the day passed like a whispered storm. Everywhere Mia went, eyes followed. Some were wide with respect, others with caution, but none carried the derisive glint they once had. The videos of that morning's hallway confrontation had already made their rounds. The views climbed by the minute. Evan, Brock, and Kyle didn't show up to their afternoon classes. They stayed hidden in the gym storage room, licking their wounds and muttering excuses to each other. But deep down, none of them could shake the images burned into their minds: how fast she'd moved, how precise she'd been, and most of all, how calm she'd stayed. By the final bell, the air outside was crisp with the scent of rain. Mia walked toward the gate, the weight of her backpack steady on her shoulders. She wasn't surprised when she heard the shuffle of feet behind her. "Wait," Evan called out. She stopped, but didn't turn. Evan's voice was different now, lower stripped of the swagger. "We went too far." Brock shifted beside him, his wrist still wrapped in a makeshift bandage. "Yeah, you could have really, messed us up." Mia turned slowly, meeting their eyes one by one. "I could have," she agreed, "but I didn't, because unlike you, I know when to stop." The silence that followed was thick. Even Kyle, usually the quickest to sneer, avoided her gaze. "You're not going to tell anyone else, right?" Evan asked. There was an edge of desperation in his voice, a hint that he feared more than just physical retaliation. He feared public disgrace. Mia's expression didn't change. "You've already told the world yourselves," she said, nodding toward the phone in Brock's pocket. "You think I care about your secrets? No. But you'll care about mine if you're stupid enough to push me again." Evan swallowed hard. Brock gave a tight nod. Kyle muttered something that sounded vaguely like an apology. Mia turned away and resumed walking. They didn't follow. At the gate, the wind shifted, carrying the faint laughter of other students. It didn't bother her. She had no interest in becoming some urban legend or hero. Her goal had been simple: to make them understand she wasn't prey. That goal had been achieved. By the time she disappeared down the street, the bullies still stood where she'd left them, rooted in a strange blend of fear and respect. They knew without question if they ever crossed her path in the wrong way again, there wouldn't be any warnings, and that was enough to keep them silent. Power isn't about size, volume, or the ability to strike first. It's about control. Mia had known from the start that lashing out in blind anger would only feed her bully's ego. By holding back until the right moment, she turned the dynamic on its head. She taught them, without a lecture, that intimidation loses its grip when the target refuses to play by the script. In life, it's tempting to meet aggression with immediate retaliation. But the more effective path often lies in patience, observation, and precision. The quietest person in the room can be the most dangerous, not because they lack emotion, but because they control it. Respect, born from fear, may not be the noblest form, but for those who cross boundaries, without conscience, it is sometimes the only language they understand. And once spoken, it rarely needs to be repeated.